Hey, let's start the show.
For Thursday, April 16th, 2020. Welcome to This Is Only a Test, the official podcast of Tested.com. Hello and welcome to the podcast this week. Entering now week five, it might be, of recording from home. Got standard crew with us. Jeremy Williams, how you doing?
I'm all right. Good morning, Norm.
Oh, you got blown out for a second.
Oh, it's probably, I just got to talk for a minute.
No, your video. You're bright. You're
Oh.
bright and cheery on this Wednesday morning as we're recording this. Very early. And Kishore, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, you know what I've seen as the best segment of local TV that's emerged is out of Cleveland. They do this morning segment on the news that's called "Which Day Is It?" and they have this like snappy theme song. It's like da 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 da, like old game show style, and they cut to the weatherman and he goes, "It's Wednesday," and then it just cuts back with the snappy music. I think we just need a general name for every day. It's just quarantine day.
I liked Kate McKinnon. Is that her name on Saturday Night Live where she introduced it's, from our living room. It's sometime between March and August.
Yes. I mean, it's kind of like Sesame Street. It's the letter of the day or the number of the day. You need a little jingle to go with it. What the day of the week is it? Someone come up with the jingle. Hey, last week was a lot of fun doing the Star Trek board game. I think a lot of people enjoyed watching it as well. There are apologies for some of the out of syncness that happened with the YouTube video, but you could always just watch that YouTube
I blame Kavak for the out of sync. It's clearly his fault.
The interjecting Captain Kavak. I don't know why that's not a thing. Experience Beige. But a lot of people also pointed out that we did it in a way where you had a webcam set up, an very analog way of playing the board game. But there is a tabletop simulator that we could have used on Steam that has virtualized board games that you can incorporate different layouts and systems.
There's even a virtual reality app that you can play, basically board games in. It's coming out soon, I think full release. It's intended for D&D, but we could probably figure a way to bring Beige into it.
Look, I'm all for tabletop sims, especially during this time. But there was something about the fact that game like had a VCR tape and all these like little components to it that I liked actually having the physical board out for.
We didn't actually use if you had an actual VCR with the VHS and put a camera on that would have been amazing. But none of these games require any, fast forward, rewinding, respooling the tape. It's just literally playing that hour-long video clip, which was fine. It was a lot of fun, and we might do something like that in the future. I think it's a good way to mix it up as we're in this weird new normal.
Fun.
And speaking of fun, you guys watched SNL this past weekend?
A clip or two.
I watched the whole thing. I thought it was great. I thought some of the topical stuff they did was like hit or miss, like with like the usual SNL fare of trying to hit the moment. But then as you got deeper into the show, as it got stranger, I thought it really got really funny. And some of the writing and shooting they did, you could see the creativity really shine through. I really like this bit because it felt very like TikTok of the moment where one of the stars was doing her makeup. But instead of using like just normal for her makeup tutorial, she was using Crayola markers.
Right.
It's just awesome.
It wasn't live. It was edited. So if you haven't seen this, the SNL cast members and their host, Tom Hanks, all recorded and did bits by them. Like they wrote their bits themselves. They recorded with their own webcams and then sent it in to the production team to edit together an hour and a half long episode, including a musical guest. Chris Martin was their musical guest. So you didn't, of course, have Tom Hanks play a part in the skits. And some of the skits poked fun at things like, video conference calls and Zoom and things like that. But mostly they were just independent, the performers doing their thing, making essentially YouTube videos. And having it strung together like that, in the traditional SNL format was really kind of comforting to watch, because they're going through the exact kind of same thing, being quarantined, sheltering in place, and seeing their different styles. Some of them a little more kind of adept at the YouTube style. Was really fun, and they did their own makeup, set decorating. I don't know if they'll do it again, but it was like the weekend update was amazing. I really enjoyed.
And they even did an animated segment, and I thought that was the best one. Middle-aged Mutant Ninja Turtles. That was amazing that they had an animated segment, and it totally worked, and it was hilarious.
That was the one bit that felt out of place to me, because that felt like they had it just in the back burner, in the backlog. Like, oh, we have this animated segment that we need to run at some point in the season. Let's throw it in this one as a bit, as opposed to something that was made in the 7 days or however many days they've been planning for this this at home episode.
Don't care.
Yeah.
It was funny.
Yeah. Kate McKinnon as RBG. I thought that was my favorite bit. And it's wholesome SNL fun. The Twitch, there was a Twitch sketch that I thought was not the best. It was standard older dude playing video games and not being good at them bit. I didn't take personal offense for it. I just thought that it wasn't that funny. But the best thing I did see online, unrelated to this, and it's a very SNL style joke. Do you see this? Over 1 million retweets. An effects artist posted a picture saying, "Oh, now that there's no traffic, the skies are so clear, you could actually make out the Universal logo." And it was a picture of the sky, and very lightly overhead, you see like these big letters like UN reverse, because it's the Universal logo.
Well, are they moving? Because
No,
like
it's just a
that's the
picture.
whole thing. Like the Universal logo is moving across the sky, right?
It would be moving very much too quickly, like faster than ISS crossing the sky, the way it rotates with the planet in that logo. But it was just a still, and it was an effects artist, and he posted up behind the scene pictures of how he CG'd that up. And I thought that was the most it was the right type of humor we needed right now.
That might have been the most viral thing of the week, but I still think the most important thing of the week was the Apollo 13 anniversary stuff that was coming out. So it's been 50 years since the mission launched. I think Monday night was the 50 years since there was Houston, we've had a problem moment. And I think on the 17th, which is Friday, is 50 years from when they returned to Earth. So there have been celebrations. Tom Hanks has been tweeting out stuff as the star of that film. I did a watch along with a lot of like space historians and other space nerds on Monday night, which is just awesome. That film is amazing. And the thing that kind of like half broke my brain is it was 25 years from when the events of the movie that happened in 1970 to when the film came out in 95, and it's been 25 years since the movie came out to where we are now.
Wow.
You didn't just do a watch along, you started at 6:17 so that when Tom Hanks utters the line, it was when the line was actually uttered 50 years ago to the minute. That was awesome. Yeah. I explained that to my family at dinner, and I was overjoyed with like emotion and energy, and they were just like, "Oh, okay, yeah, cool."
Okay,
it was cool. There's a bunch of people that did that around the world, and it was fun. And then as it played in the movie, like right after that scene, we actually listened to the real audio on the stream coming from the NASA archives. And obviously in the movie, it's like slightly more dramatized. There's like a film score underneath it, all that kind of stuff. But it's remarkable how calm that line is delivered, like how it was delivered real time. Like you can hear hints of like, oh no, there's something really wrong, because it's usually just straight monotone from from the astronauts, but it's still like everything that was happening was remarkably calm. And Bobak Ferdowsi was doing the live stream, and he said, yeah, that's how it feels. Like you rarely get to any moments where there's bits of emotion in terms of flight control talking back and forth, because they're working through so many procedures. There just isn't you just usually don't see like room for that kind of emotion to come through. So it's kind of interesting to compare and contrast.
Yeah, there's also a documentary that's, I think it's on archive.org. It's from the National Archives that was made using the footage from the time. It's called Apollo 13 Houston, We've Got a Problem. And if you just search archive.org, you can actually watch the whole
Yeah.
thing. It's
And two
really
other
good.
plugs. There's Apollo in Real Time, which is a website where you can like follow along in real time, hear the archival audio, and then they've restored some images, including images of the actual explosion, of what the module looked like when it exploded. Obviously, it sort of is gone, but you can see some restored images of what it looks like, because like they only the astronauts aboard only got that fleeting look at it out the window once, and we don't have many visualizations of what it looked like. So the recreation's great, and then some restored photographs from inside the module as well.
Any word now that we're talking about space history and the state of the world about upcoming launches that were planned, that were on the calendar for this year?
The big one is a Mars 2020 launch that's scheduled in July, and if they miss the launch window, which they've I think it essentially their window stretches out, a few weeks into August, I believe. If they miss that window, they have to wait another 230 days. Or I'm sorry, 2 years. Sorry, just because of the way the orbits line up.
Wow.
So they're going to do everything they can. And the material's already in Florida. It got transferred from California to Florida. So Bobak was going through all of that kind of stuff. So that's the one that like strikes me as like, if they miss the window, that has like big repercussions. But from what I hear, they're doing everything they can to sort of keep it on track. Some of the other launches where you're delivering, a satellite to space, or like certain kind of maintenance missions, those can slip and probably not have a big impact if we're talking about on the order of like a few months. But there are some larger missions like the Mars 2020. So that's the one I'll probably be watching closest. And really, it's not the NASA clean room is probably the safest place in the world right now to a certain extent. So it's really just about the health of all the workers and the safety of all the workers that have to be part of a launch.
Yeah, the one I'm also keeping an eye out on. I know SpaceX has halted or postponed some of the Starlink satellite launches, but in May there's supposed to be the first crewed Dragon launch, and I haven't
But
heard
I
that
don't
that's
think
been
there's any
canceled
real
yet.
pressure to do that in
Yeah,
May.
yeah, right, right. Alrighty. Well, we'll have links in the description for where you can go back and watch that live stream that you did, Kishore, and the documentaries and other places you can go to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Apollo 13. And then we move to our
Top stories this week.
So big Apple news, actually breaking Apple news as we started recording this episode. But the top story, I think, let's not talk about hardware. Let's talk about software. Apple and Google coming together in a big announcement late last week about a software platform they're developing that will allow for apps that will support the effort for contact tracing. Kishore, do you want to give a little bit of update or a refresher as to what contact tracing is and how phones could potentially help with it?
Yeah, so the primer on contact tracing, and this is straight out of the playbook for every pandemic, is after you get through an acute phase, like you want to be able to, with a lot of specificity, identify flare-ups, like where are specific cases rising and who those specific cases may have infected, and isolate it as a way of quickly tamping down the virus without having broad social effects. So contact tracing historically has been let's find a person that's sick. Let's then ask them who they may have come in contact with over the last whatever week period or 2 week period. And then let's go find those people, call them up on the phone, go knock on their doors, and test them. And if they test positive, let's isolate them for whatever long period, like 2 weeks, let's say. If they're negative, maybe we keep them isolated for a few days to make sure they don't develop any symptoms. But essentially, we maintain a record of who is potentially infected and use that to manage down how quickly the virus can spread. It's a long used tactic, and it's being used right now in many other countries, including New Zealand, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, Iceland, to control the spread of COVID-19. Most places use some combination right now of technology and boots on the ground. And boots on the ground is important because that's just the brute force way that usually works, and there's humans involved, and so having humans on the other side of this probably has made the most sense. So most places have um a ratio of somewhere around 1 to 20 to 25,000 people in locations of contact tracers, like physical people that are helping manage this. So in like a city of San Francisco that's like 800,000 people, we probably need around 200 people doing this work to quell the number of cases that might emerge, let's say, after we get out of this acute period. That's a
So
quick primer in contact tracing.
the technology they're talking about here on a low level allows for kind of reverse engineering the contacts that people may have out in the wild once we're able to be out in the world again, to really supplement what you're talking about, the actual teams on the boots on the ground, people making phone calls and doing the research and talking to people about who they've been in contact with phones or not, and also supplementing testing, which is really kind of the important thing. But the way it works, it's going to use Bluetooth Low Energy, and obviously privacy is a big concern for everyone. Like, is it basically your Google location data? Because you can go into your Google account right now and basically see how Google has tracked where you are and where your phones are. But instead of that, and the idea of location data may be used to some extent, is that you will basically you will ping Bluetooth radios will ping each other and create little markers for when they are within range of each other, stored on your phone um, locally under a kind of a identifier key. And if you test positive, then you opt in to share that information, which then gets propagated through their back end. Those keys are downloaded, or those codes are downloaded for everyone. It gets unlocked on everyone's phone, and if there are matches, then people who may have been in proximity to you get alerted that you were in close proximity to someone.
I read that it specifically did not use location data, and that was sort of crucial to their privacy concerns.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's just using the Bluetooth Low Energy pings for those beacons, because it's like the location is less important. If everyone's opt in, the location's less important. It's like you don't actually need the location, you need the person.
Right. Well, and then some analyses says while they're on their face right now saying location will not be explicitly used, from a practical standpoint, it may have to be, at least maybe broadly, because when these keys, these pings are 16 bytes each, but in aggregate over billions of people using phones over time, and how long they want to keep this information. If you're talking about 2 weeks of potential pings right in the world, then you're also talking about people having to download hundreds of megabytes every time someone tests positive, and that from a infrastructure standpoint is untenable. Like, you can't ask people on cellular on internet, poor internet connections, to download hundreds of megabytes a day or however frequently to get the latest set of keys.
So I think there's a couple things here. So first, a technology question. So let's put this in like kind of a hypothetical situation. So Norm, let's say you have the virus, and we're hanging out in an office. How good is this beacon sharing that it can actually share these keys only when I come within 6 feet of you? Like, I've always understood low energy Bluetooth to not have that kind of specific ability to measure distance. Like they must be using the power, the strength of the signal to actually infer distance. And we've seen that in previous iterations on, I think the latest iPhone had information, like we covered a story about
Hmm.
how
Hmm.
they had multiple antennas.
Yep.
So I think that's my number one question. Like, can they actually get that distance data down so that we're not getting all these false positives, so that if Norm goes to a grocery store and he comes within 6 feet of 500 people, that we're not testing a order of magnitude more people than we need to,
I
because that's a strain on the system.
I think that that there are parts of the Bluetooth specification that were intended to measure distance, but they're flawed, especially in the case of phones, because it depends on the angle that the antenna is at, and it also depends on what's surrounding the phone. And people have them in cases or bags, or going through their body in different directions, and so it's definitely not going. I don't think that it's going. They're trying to like only measure people within 6 feet, and that's like the determining factor. I
Yeah.
think what they can get though is duration. And so if you're within a signal that has tested positive for more than X minutes, then maybe that is a part of their their whatever their whitelist.
And,
And
and frankly,
it's better
that's
than
super
Wi-Fi or
useful.
GPS, right? Like Wi-Fi and
Yeah.
GPS are way less accurate. And you're right that Bluetooth in the protocol has the ability to kind of ping and do distance approximation depending on the signal. It's far less accurate than what Apple has built into the new iPhones, which has been tapped into, but it's something that most current phones have. I think it's going to also be a power drain too, because then you're talking about when you're opting in using the app in the background. That's part of what this API that Google and Apple are developing, is that you're basically taxing the radio, the Bluetooth radio, to always be pinging and looking for people.
Yeah, so I think and it's important to note, this isn't an app they're developing. They're really developing the back end for other apps to leverage this technology for the tracking. And I think that's important because uh, I don't think we can think about this as the front line of information gathering on this. I still think like a human asking questions to a infected person is going to be the first thing that we do, because there's a way that that is going to just work with the kind of specificity that we need off the bat. And my a sort of example of this is Singapore has a tracing app. It's called Trace Together. It uses very similar technology to what Apple and Google are suggesting. It uses Bluetooth, and Singapore is like closer to an authoritarian state than the U.S. And even with that, they only got 20% of the population to actually download the app to have it, to potentially report cases. So I think when we go to like a tech-based architecture, even if this works, it's not going to work as universally as we think. And I think the data will probably have a lot of false negatives in it. So I think if it starts with a human talking to somebody, being like, who did you come in contact with, and they use the technology layer to either confirm or at least like give them a starting place of saying like, here's a priority place to start when you go make phone calls and knock on doors. I think like in that way, this could be super, super useful and maybe speed up the efficiency, where instead of having, 1,000 people for a big city having to do this, maybe you can have like 750 people and
Right.
get through it a little faster. But I don't think we can think about this as like some panacea, because the technology around like the Bluetooth location, like the distance that Jeremy was talking about is susceptible. The likelihood that everyone is going to opt into this is not clear. Like, what if you just shut off Bluetooth on your phone? Then this is all out the window. Like, there's like a million kind of human elements here.
Can
Or
we
bad actors, right?
just for a minute appreciate the fact that Apple and Google are working together to attempt to improve the public good?
Oh no, I mean, this is absolutely great. And also it's like a necessity. Like they had to do this. Because this is not like and this they didn't do this for the US. This is a global issue, and they control what? Like 85, 90, it must be 90+% of the market of phones running their OSs, right? So this is the right move for them. There's still like not a ton of details. Like we don't have everything out from on the specs, and I assume they're still working behind the scenes on how this is going to roll out.
Yeah.
But also, like I don't want to give them too much credit yet either, Jeremy, because they haven't done anything. I mean, I think it's a great announcement, and B, that there's a little bit of this move that is like covering their butts by just working on the back end piece and not actually like developing,
Making the app.
like
Right,
making the app.
I understood that it was a part of the OS level though. So it is no?
Well, the OS part is the part that will share like the keys on the iPhone and the keys on Android phones will be compatible, but someone still needs to make the app that you opt into and press the button if you've tested positive that then alerts other people. So still needs to be a standardized singular app for that.
To that question, are we going to have to see like a OTA update pushed to phones to make to enable this infrastructure? We don't know that. Like that again will make a huge impact, particularly on Android, in terms of how well this works.
Yeah. Even though it was announced last week, we don't know when this will be implemented. It is, like you said, part of that next phase. So there is a ticking clock for when this will be useful, and you don't want that window to be missed either. But
Jeremy's right. We should appreciate this because this is like a collaboration between companies that we haven't ever seen them take on. So
yeah, you just wonder in the back end, in the contract part, does Apple require their logos to be ahead of Google's, or is all that? I mean, that's not uncommon for some apps where the App Store logo has to be ahead of the Play Store logo.
But also as a side point, I know there's a lot of people with privacy concerns. They have pledged to dismantle this infrastructure once this pandemic has passed.
Just like Batman did in The Dark Knight, right?
I don't know
the key to the one person he trusted.
I was talking to Alexis Madrigal from The Atlantic, who's covered tech for a long time yesterday. And his point was like, I get the privacy concerns and we have to acknowledge them and we have to think through like the bad actors. But we also can't pretend that we're on some like hypothetical planet where we can like dream and talk about privacy when there isn't a pandemic happening and like tens of millions of lives are being affected on a daily basis. Like for a lot of people, so like a component of this technology is the difference between going back to work and not. And so it has like massive consequences. And so in that way, like at least I'm thinking about the privacy component very differently than I would have been under different circumstances.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people would be very cognizant of that too. The awareness. I mean, the fact that we're talking about it, privacy being the number one thing they brought up. Like I think that part will hopefully work itself out with so many eyeballs on this. All right, let's move on. I don't know if it's you guys as well, but is it weird to see like movie news and read movie news these days?
I welcome it. Look, I said this. I don't know if on this podcast or somewhere else. I'm watching marble racing like nonstop. I'm itching for any bit of like entertainment, sports, any of that stuff. So like, give me something to look forward to.
It's a very optimistic look because I'm not just talking about flipping on what ESPN's doing with the horse games or the Fox Sports, the iRacing challenges and all the ways the networks are kind of trying to create content right now. But like when a movie studio and the marketing departments are releasing strategically the first stills from Dune, right? That's a very optimistic part of their strategy for them because it says that they're working as if things are hopefully going to be normal. Dune coming out at the end of this year, a movie that I'm very looking forward to, and that they think that by the end of this year, it's still going to reach theaters. And so I think it's a very optimistic look, or multiple ways to look at it. But we did see the first pictures of Denis Villeneuve's Dune. This is starring all the actors, and it's going to be the first of a 2-part series, I think, covering the adaptation of the Dune book. What do you guys think? Were you guys fans of the first Dune movie?
So
Or
I'm
followed Dune?
not so much the movie, but I'm a fan of the novels. So I'm a big fan of the Dune series. These images look incredible. Like there's a way that, especially or Oscar Isaac as Atreides looks incredible in that armor. And that's Josh Brolin, right?
There's Josh Brolin. You got Oscar Isaac, Timothy Chalamet's in there. Jason Momoa's in there. Sans beard.
As Duncan Idaho, and he looks looks like born for the part. Looks incredible.
Zendaya's in here. Rebecca Ferguson from the Mission Impossible movies. It has everyone, and it's a Denis Villeneuve movie, and it the look of it, the color palette, the desert landscape, all of it feels like an iteration on what he did with Blade Runner, which is bleak and very clean lines. It looks gorgeous. I think it is supposed to be Richard Deakins, who's the director of photography for this one. I will have to Google that.
Do you know if they're anticipating an R rating?
I don't know. It must be PG-13. This is a big studio film. It's not Richard Deakins. It's Greg Fraser who's doing this.
I think there's only going to be violence, so I would expect PG-13 is where they end up.
One criticism I've seen, because Dune is beloved by science fiction fans, by artists, and there are people who love the David Lynch film, but the Dune film that was never made. Did you guys watch that documentary?
No.
Hordowski's Dune. Before the David Lynch Dune, there was a movie, a Dune adaptation that had Mobius as its art director. Salvador Dali was supposed to be in it. Dan O'Bannon, who wrote the Alien script, was the effects guy on it. It's the film that, because it didn't get made, brought the people together to make the first Alien film. And the concept art, and there's a whole documentary about like the storyboards and the art designs of this there's essentially this giant book of art for this film. It's super colorful and it's super wild. It has a very Mobius look, and this film is not that at all. It's
so you're saying that
monotone.
Dune was going to get made like prior to when it was made, like 5 years prior.
Yeah. The documentary Hordowski's Dune was made in 2013, and it was about the adaptation that was in the mid 70s when they were originally going to make that. And
Wow.
Google the pictures. It's some weird, fantastical pictures and costuming. It's super colorful. It's kind of very surrealist, and maybe it's not appropriate for the palates of cinema goers today, but it's one of those things that illustrators and concept artists have always hoped would get realized on screen, or at least a tribute to that. But it looks like they're going a very different tact in this Dune. I do like the logo though. You see the logo? This was leaked earlier, but it's just like the curved circles of DUNE.
Oh yeah.
A little bit of an E. Yeah, at the end.
You mean the logo that people aren't allowed to show because they force people to take it down?
Well, yes, but they can show it now, right? I think now that these photos
now
are
that
out,
this is out, they can show it. Okay.
Yes, now that the marketing strategy is in place and rolling out, and operating as if the movie's going to come out at the end of this year, which fingers crossed it will, but maybe not in California, right? Because Gavin Newsom did say that gatherings like concerts and theaters, we might not be able to open those up until we get at least like herd immunity, which may be 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, even restaurants might have to reduce the number of tables that they have. So I don't know what they would do in theaters. They like block off chairs. You can't sit so close to each other.
Oh, you would love it, Jeremy.
I guess. I mean, I'll pay $20 to rent it at home.
Have either of you done that yet? Have you watched or rented a movie at home?
Yeah.
That was in theaters. I finally did it this weekend. Trolls World Tour, baby. It was okay.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I was a little. I had to, come to the realization that it wasn't as good as the first one, but it was fine. It was a good use of my family's time.
That's a fine movie to watch at home because it's a family movie. It's a movie for kids. And I don't think kids, if you're talking about the age that Trolls is made for, what is that, like 4 to 7, 4 to 9 maybe? I don't think those kids appreciate the movie going experience. I mean, you guys tell me, when the first time you guys brought your kids to the movie theater, did they care about sitting in the seat in the dark room with the big screen?
They can't tell the difference between standard definition and high definition, between widescreen, pan and scan. There's no level of judgment when it comes to quality. All they care about is the candy. And that's what they get when they go to a movie and they go to the movie theater. They get to, get a bag.
Oh, not the eye candy. You're talking about the literal sweets.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
right.
That's it.
The shared viewing experience with other people, laughing with an audience, none of that is appealing. None of that's a selling point for them.
No.
Look,
not watching at home. If you give them the candy, then they're all good.
I've been watching a lot of movies with my son at home, and we went through the Night at the Museum movies. And I don't know if you've seen the Night at the Museum sequel, but it's very bad. And it very bad on every level. But there was just pure people falling down and almost sound effects playing when they fell down. And my kid couldn't get enough of it. So I just want to say kids' sense of quality and thoughtfulness in writing, not necessarily there. So I don't think if they can't even get through the writing aspect and the storytelling, I don't think they care about the HD aspect either.
Yeah, and which is why a movie like Trolls World Tour might be perfect for this, or Sonic, and that's one I watched recently. And I thought it was okay. That's a movie that I'm glad I watched at home. Didn't need to go to the theater to watch. We haven't put a lot of Frozen 2 on. I know we haven't talked about it on the show yet. I know, Jeremy, you wanted to months ago when it was in theaters. And I will concede that is a movie that not only has it grown on me, but I wish I saw in theaters.
Ha!
I know my kid, even if he was 3 years older than he is now, and he could go to theaters and watch it and, sing along or enjoy Olaf on the big screen. For me, the visuals of that film, I regret not being able to see that on the big screen, on an IMAX screen or a Dolby Cinema screen.
That's what I wanted to. That's what I wanted to talk about. Was the visuals in that film are the most like Fantasia than any standard Disney film I can think of. It just completely ignores reality, rips you straight out of any kind of realism, and puts you into this fantasy to let the animators do what they want land, time and again.
And the structure of the film is it's a musical. It's yes, there is a plot, but the plot only services getting to the song, the set pieces for the songs. And the effects are great. Everyone's talking about the water and on all the the environmental effects of the wind and the rock creatures, but the framing, the cinematography of that film, they have characters that are small relative to the landscapes. When you have these waves, it's not a spoiler. People can have seen Frozen 2 when Elsa's riding on her water horse, right? That is something I really wish I saw on the big screen.
It's also boldly depressing, isn't it? It goes to a dark place a couple times, more than
quickly too.
Yeah.
Jeremy, you missed your opportunity when Norm proclaimed that to go, I can hear you, but I won't.
Wow, nicely done. Have you been listening to the soundtrack?
Once was enough. I got the gist.
Regularly. Into the Unknown, Weezer's, the Weezer Lost in the Woods. That brings me right back to the early aughts, late 90s.
Yeah.
And even the Panic at the Disco take of Into the Unknown. I mean, it's burned into our brains now, where we just sing Into the Unknown as a way to calm the baby down when he's changing his diapers.
And your baby Loves the Olaf.
Loves the Olaf. I mean, Disney has something on their hands there with that Olaf. Josh Gad. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all just living in his world, from LeFou in Beauty and the Beast to Olaf. Yeah. I can't wait to introduce him to the Book
You're
of
just
Mormon.
reinforcing my take that kids don't have a developed sense of humor
Yeah.
and good writing.
He probably likes Jar Jar.
That would be a good test. We'll get to that in a couple years. We'll get to that. I mean, the Disney folks definitely know what they're doing. And speaking of the Disney folks, we of course reported that Bob Iger had retired and been replaced by new Bob. But the Iger is back on Easter Sunday. He is risen. He has returned.
Oh.
No.
He's come back, Bob Iger, to retake the reins of the Walt Disney Company in this dire time. Obviously, the company is feeling the impacts of the pandemic. Its biggest source of money is its parks department, theme parks and its cruises, and those are not operating right now, and television and the movie studios, of course. But he has come basically out of retirement, not become the CEO. He's still executive chairman, but he's going to manage the company in this time during this kind of this transition period.
So if you were Bob too, would this make you happy or would this make you sad?
I think relieved. Like, I don't think it was an easy job for him to come in on this high note, right? The biggest grossing film of all time last year, the culmination of 10 years of Marvel films, the impending launch of 3 new Disney cruise ships, and then the launch of Disney Plus. But obviously, no one's going to be a leader and a CEO without a plan. And so, he probably had a vision for what he wanted to do in 5 years, in 10 years to grow the Disney company and brand. And that's all on pause. That's there's no way he gets to enact that. It's almost like, again, going back to the West Wing, an administration has 4 years to do something, but you get everything done in the first 100 days. His first 100 days, out the window, right? So would not be surprising that, he has to wait 2 years until things get back to relative normal and then reevaluate what that plan is. And, it's probably a little bit of a sense of relief for that, because the board or whoever evaluates his performance will have to take that into consideration, but also probably a disappointment because, to be head of one of the biggest media companies in the world and not get to actually shepherd it is tough.
Yeah, I don't envy I don't envy anybody in that situation. I mean, even the board. Like, how do you even judge somebody in this environment?
Yeah. I mean, there's no way. I mean, we're right in the middle of it right now. Like, history is happening right now. But we're gonna stick with some Disney news. There was a Disney on Broadway benefit show that was filmed in November, and if you're looking for something to watch this weekend, the Disney company has finally come to terms with the musicians union to be able to stream this benefit show, and so it will be streamed this Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And it will be hosted by some of the performers from the Disney on Broadway shows. If you haven't seen any of those shows, whether it's Aladdin, Frozen, Lion King, they're delightful fare, and I'll be tuning in to watch that.
What is this show? Is it just a musical?
It's going to be a bunch of performances from the different musicals. So whether it's like those ones I just mentioned, or including, I even think things like Hamilton, but they'll be raising money for their local charities and also for the COVID crisis right now. But it'll be available on Playbill, iHeartRadio, Broadway, and websites on ABC networks across the country. Disney Plus announced 2 new shows I want to mention because we don't have the MCU shows and they're kind of in a lull right now, aside from their back catalog. Oh, I will give a shout out. You know how last week we mentioned the Simpsons short that was ahead of Onward, but had not appeared? It's there now. It's there. The 5-minute Maggie short is now on Disney Plus. So someone must have heard us complain about it.
Yep.
And put it on there, as well as collections for Simpsons episodes. If you want to see like various just a set of episodes featuring certain characters, or episodes where they try to predict the future, or Treehouse of Horror episodes, those kind of collections are also on Disney Plus, which I'm very happy about. But in terms of new content, there are 2 new shows. One is behind the scenes for The Mandalorian, and this is something I guess, have been working on while the first season had been shooting, and it's gearing up to be released on, as expected or predictably, May 4th. It's going to be an 8-episode series called Disney Gallery, The Mandalorian, which will have your standard BTS interviews with cast and crew, but also a look into the costuming, the making of the child, as well as the behind the effects technologies, like the what's it called? Not the volume, but the stagecraft that was used for creating outdoor scenes in their interior stages.
I know they want you to call it the child, Norm, but we don't call it the child.
It's Baby Yoda.
Yeah.
I'm gonna see how long I can stick to the child until either the race is known or until the child gets a name. Isn't the child more ominous? Isn't it more mysterious? The child, no, Baby Yoda.
It has a name. The name is Baby Yoda. We've decided
a colloquial name.
Yes,
Baby
but we've
Yoda.
decided it. It's colloquially universal at this point.
Is the new version of, like, Boba Fett is not a Mandalorian. Boba Fett just wears Mandalorian armor. This is not Baby Yoda. This is the child in The Mandalorian. The other TV show I want to call out on Disney, coming up to Disney Plus, this one came out of nowhere. It's a series called Prop Culture. Great name. And it's a documentary series where they go into the Disney archives, costumes and props, and examine props from films like Pirates of the Caribbean, Mary Poppins, and Tron. Nightmare Before Christmas, the stop motion maquettes and puppets, as well as scenes, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And it's hosted by someone we know, Dan Lanigan, who is a well-known prop collector and fan and producer. And I think his production company is creating this show.
There's also some familiar faces, like Fawn Davis is in the trailer, and Phil Tippett's in the trailer too.
Yep. So a lot of people kind of that we've interviewed before or kind of in our spheres. Dan, if you had not known, he's the guy has a massive, like, original prop collection, and actually has the Blade Runner blaster that Adam is the biggest fan of and replicated. There's a video on Tested where Dan and Adam examine and compare the blasters. And also his company was the one that did he directed the Futurama fan film, the Fanorama, a couple of years ago that we went on set for. So good for him. Congratulations to him for getting this show done. The moment we saw this announced, could only imagine what films and what props they'd be able to explore, and it sounds like they're gearing up for, hopefully, if this does well, more than one season, and because there's so many Disney films for which the props and costumes, like, they're one of the few companies that actually archives that stuff, because it's very expensive otherwise too.
It's hard to imagine a show that appeals to the tested audience more than this one.
Yeah. Great name, Prop Culture. And I wonder, it's going to premiere May 1st. So in just a few weeks' time.
The name is so good. You wonder, like, was that trademarked and taken already? And
I don't know. And their logo is great. It's a take on the Hollywood sign on the Hollywood Hills. But it says Prop Culture. Like, this is. I'm curious because I don't know what. Like, obviously within the tested audience and our community, this is, like, ripe for us, right? This is checking all the boxes. But I'm curious what the wider audience will think of it. Will they like that kind of scrutiny into the props? Will the interviews be insightful? I think one of the things they're doing, it sounds like, is reuniting the actors with the costumes and the props they used in those films. And that's a little bit less interesting, but I get that appeal for Disney fans. So they're going to straddle that line for Disney fans. If you've ever been to a D23 convention in Anaheim, one of the best parts of D23, which is in the Anaheim Convention Center where WonderCon is they essentially have a museum exhibit where they take costumes and props from the archive and create a makeshift gallery that they have to wait in a long line to get in. And they've done, costumes from the Pirates of the Caribbean ride and films. And so this feels like that exhibit turned into a TV show, but hopefully it's more than just like the 5 props from the film. It's like here gives you a sense of the scope of like how many costumes, how many things were actually made, and over time, how are they preserved and how they manufacture that stuff. That's the stuff I'm interested in. But May 1st, Prop Culture on Disney Plus. I want to give a shout out to a couple more things. There's a wonderful piece of fan art, and I'll link this in the show notes. But artist name Max, well, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. He's a Russian artist. But on his Behance, he drew out the Razor Crest in cross section. So this not only pays homage to the ship design from The Mandalorian, but also to those great cross section books that we read as kids. And it is an illustration that is just so detailed. He's kind of created his own, world building, his own canon as to what's behind the hull, where the different parts of the sensors and the jamming devices and the weapon systems and the loading bays of the ship are. But I don't. It's not an official sanctioned piece of art, but it's one of those things that if it was on a poster, I'd want to get immediately.
Wait, you can't buy this?
You cannot buy it. It's an unlicensed piece of fan art.
Oh, let's get that solved.
I know. Yeah.
Man,
yeah.
He's even beautiful.
It's the art itself is beautiful, but he also took the time to do a whole layout. So it looks like it's a 2-page spread in one of those big cross-section books, right? With all the call outs and the annotations and again, his own little world building. So we'll link it to his Behance in the description. But if you even Google The Mandalorian's Razor Crest cross-section in Google, you should be able to find it. But yeah, lovely piece of art. Rosario Dawson did an interview. A quick shout out, switching gears to Star Trek, where she said that, at this point in her career, it hasn't been formally confirmed that she'll be in a future season of The Mandalorian, but it really sounds like that's where it's headed. But she'd be happy to be in either Star Wars or Star Trek. And she threw this out there that she would like to be maybe in a future season of Picard as a member of the Q continuum.
Why not?
Done. Sign her up.
Sign her up. That I would love that. I think she would be an amazing Q. She had the right presence. It's a little bit of like a Doctor Who feel to that, but I feel like that's what we need out of Picard. That's the right amount of callback as well as a fresh take.
You mentioned Doctor Who here, and I have a question. Let's just say hypothetically that I have never seen a single episode of Doctor Who ever of any series that's ever been televised. Just hypothetically. Where would I start if I wanted to watch Doctor Who?
I got an answer for you. I got it.
I got one too.
Okay. And the reason I have this is because Danica is a big fan of Doctor Who, and I am in your position, Jeremy, where I too have not watched much of Doctor Who. I've seen the episodes here and there, but I had the same question, and I was told to me the one episode you should watch, which is in the Stephen Moffat era. So it's not like the old episodes. It's kind of when it was rebooted for David Tennant. It's Blink.
Blink is was my number one recommendation as well. You should start with the David Tennant era because it's like a little bit goofy, but it's also accessible. There's kind of like a serialized story, but you don't necessarily have to subscribe to the serialized story. Blink is a self-contained story that gives you a flavor of David Tennant as the Doctor, but also just like it's bizarre and just it's an incredible storytelling event. Really, Doctor Who is less. So I'm going to say something maybe controversial for like big Doctor Who fans. I think Doctor Who is less about the Doctor and more about his companion. If you like the companion, you'll like it. So I think there's some David Tennant companions that are really enjoyable. My favorite companions of recent note were Karen Gillan and forget the other guy's name right now. Rory is his character's name when they were with Matt Smith. But that's the era I would start with. But very easy to drop into.
correct me if I'm wrong, but like people have favorite doctors, and if I'm
Yeah,
gonna
of
be
course.
if I'm gonna be in that conversation, I need to watch the classics.
Yeah, and then like usually you get recommendations to go Baker Doctor, which is the doctor that wears a scarf. He's probably the most famous early doctor, but those are harder to drop into because it is watching television from the 70s and 60s. Like how likely are they to hold up to you right now?
Yeah.
I watched them because my brother was watching them as a kid. That's when I really watched them, so I have nostalgia for them. But you coming in without any nostalgia, without any love for the character, I think it's going to make it a much harder place to drop into.
I watched a fantastic video a few days ago by a guy named Up Is Not Jump, all about Half-Life Alyx, and he just threw away a line about comparing something to the Fourth Doctor, and it was like supposed to be a bad thing, and I really wanted to understand it, so I'm considering dedicating a part of my life to watching Doctor Who.
There's a lot of Doctor Who episodes. It could be a big deep dive.
Yeah,
But we'll follow you on your journey. But start with Blink. I mean,
Blink.
we have a consensus in the room. Blink is the one. You'll be able to find it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
One last bit of pop culture news, kind of also tying back to Disneyland. There are two. Now obviously, we can't go to Disneyland right now. I'm very lucky, and we talk about it here, at least at home, how fortunate I was to be able to go with my family to Disney World in February before the whole thing shut down. But fans love Disneyland and Disney World, and if they can't go there, well, they're going to recreate it in their own homes.
Love it.
There's a Minecraft server that's been a long-running recreation of Disneyland, where people gathered to do, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, they had a Pixar fireworks show. They recreated the fireworks show and had people join the Minecraft server. And in Minecraft, together shared the experience of watching the fireworks show with the effects. But it's become basically a place where like people can gather and just explore and like have that familiarity of this is where I would be if I was at Disneyland. It's also been recreated in Dreams. And that's why I want to mention this, because Jeremy, I know you're a big fan of PS4's Dreams.
Yeah, I've got a box right behind me that's still in the shrink wrap, because I know if I open it, that's it. Like, there's no more regular life, no productivity.
Explain what Dreams is.
Right. I think people have been trying to do that for 5 years. It is an app. It is a $40 game that you can buy in a box and put in your PlayStation 4, but it is a game engine that does everything. It is an app that allows you to model, texture, compose sounds, soundscapes, sound effects, music, design user interfaces, create animations, create gameplay, create logic and rules and structures. And basically, like, this is by the Little Big Planet. By Media Molecule, who made Little Big Planet, which they released and people made basically platformers out of. But then they tried to make other things as well, like way beyond what the designers intended or imagined it was capable of. And so they sort of said, well, what if we just make a tool that can make anything? And so that's what they did, and they made Dreams, which really is a game engine, a $40 game engine that, unlike any other game engine, requires no other tools in order to manufacture just about anything.
And you could do everything with controller on the PS4 or outside.
Or the Move controllers,
right?
If you have the eye.
Yeah, and so people are creating things that are, obviously using the rendering power of the PS4, look graphically great, and the asset-wise don't look like just things that are in a library that come in the box, to a point where it's all UGC, so you can go subscribe and download these environments and these levels, and someone has created ride by ride the Disneyland Resort, and the Space Mountain one was just released, where it's the full building, it's the whole queue, and then you can actually get on the ride and ride it with all the sound effects.
And they have the music and everything. Yeah, it's very, very well done.
Yeah. All these also bring tension that part of the Disneyland experience is the crowds. And being in an empty Disneyland, I think, takes away from part of the magic.
It's funny because I joked to my family when this first, when Disneyland first shut down, that they don't have to shut down. They could let one family in. But you're right. Like if you watch this thing that was made in dreams, it's you never. That's not Disneyland. Like you're supposed to be a shared experience. It very much is. That is a part of the excitement.
There's a critical mass. It's like a curve, right? To a point where at a certain capacity where maybe the lines are, 15, 20 minutes and not 2 hours, but in the right density of people, that's a sweet spot for where I want to be when I go to a Disneyland. Because you can, people watch and their families and their joy and kids, like that's all part of it. But an empty Disneyland is a little bit, it's not so much sad as it breaks some of that immersiveness that it goes for, right? The hiding of the world outside this world.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that the thing that you mentioned that was made in dreams would have been made anyway. Like that's clearly just a passion project. But what I do like are the YouTube videos of people simulating going to Disneyland who would have otherwise been going now. They're recreating the Pirates of the Caribbean or, Ariel's Grotto in their spaces, and they're like pushing people in laundry baskets down the hallway, and they've put up all the artwork and they're doing what they can in order to recreate it. I think it's fun. It's fantastic. I think that's a worthy pursuit.
Last story in pop culture. Now, I'm not sure if this is a true story. It was tweeted by ESPN, but apparently in soccer matches, if football resumes, so soccer internationally, there are some stadiums that are allowing fans to pay to have cardboard cutouts of themselves placed in the stands.
Brilliant.
Creepy.
Yes. No, it's
creepy.
Fantastic. Like this is absolutely great. Like they've got to come up with a way to earn revenue. And so who wouldn't want to see a cardboard cutout of themselves on television, like in the stands?
I wouldn't want to see that. That's weird.
So when I say cardboard cutout, it's like literally life size. Someone has taken, a webcam photo, they've blown it up and they've cut out the silhouette of a person and like taped it or, mounted on a stand and spaced it. So it looks essentially like a mid-aughts era EA Sports audience.
This is
like a PS3 crowd.
This is Major League Baseball or ESPN taking a page straight out of Kickstarter or Patreon. I think this is fantastic. This is fresh thinking. I like it.
It's so weird to look at. And are they going to flap? Right? Is there going to be like this kind of passive animation and movement?
It's
with
like
the cardboard.
It's like a PlayStation 1 video game. The crowds in the stand.
Exactly. Are they going to simulate like spatial audio? Right. I want to pay to have my cardboard cutout in the good seat.
Yeah.
Right. In the team section. So you got to maybe take a picture of you wearing your jersey. So all the color coordination matches as if it was a live game. And then audio design, whether for broadcast or for the actual, for the players, because, actually it's a big difference playing for no crowd and playing for some semblance of a crowd. The spatial audio of like cheers from where they would hear for the home team, where the fans typically sit.
Pay extra for the kiss cam, all kinds of things.
You're still gonna have the mascot run up and down the stands and play pranks on the cardboard cutouts, right?
Yeah. Or hey, you could have one that like they could catch foul balls. Right? Like you put little baskets in front of them. That would be amazing.
And the next step obviously is then putting displays on these. And so you can have your login to actually have your head placed there, right? But maybe your view is better. Maybe it's asymmetrical. So your perspective is going to be the better, the camera on the field perspective, but the webcam that you broadcast will be placed on where your cardboard cutout is.
That could be done in post. Like you could totally do that. Just augment a Zoom, kind of style augmentation of get the background and put just the face on there. Love it.
Yeah, this is truly innovation coming at a desperate time. But again, I don't know if it's real, and it doesn't sound like it's being done in the U.S. But I would love to see stands. I mean, what are capacities at stadiums? Right, like 30,000, 50,000. right? Just logistically, it would be a nightmare to do. Maybe just for season ticket holders. Who knows? Yeah.
You know, can I just follow up on that story? Like, it reminded me there are churches that are doing that very same thing, and that actually means something to the people in the congregation who can't attend right now. You know, there are churches that are lining the pews with like photos of the congregation, and then taking pictures of it, and then sending it to their members.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't know that. I
yeah.
would think that the webcam aspect would be sufficient, but seeing the cutout and seeing
Yeah.
the representation, okay, interesting. Maybe not so far-fetched after all. So Apple announced new iPhones today. Surprise. Not a surprise?
That's crazy.
So this is the iPhone SE. It's a new iPhone SE. The last one was the take on the iPhone 5, fan favorite design. The one before they went with the curved corners. And the iPhone SE, that was a small form factor. This one is a take on the iPhone 8. So 4.7-inch screen. It looks like an iPhone 8. It has the same kind of top and bottom bezel, only one camera, 64 gigs of storage. It does have Touch ID with a home button, and it runs on their fast A13 chip. So it's the same processor that you get on the new iPhone 11, 11 Pros. So it's going to be speedy, but you're basically sacrificing display. You're sacrificing not having the Face ID, which some people are totally fine with. Storage, it being only 64 gigs, but it will only cost $400. So it is a low cost, relatively speaking, low cost entry level iPhone.
I really have I've lost track. Where does this fit in to their lineup?
It fits in because previously, before today, the iPhone 8 was still available. Remember, there was no iPhone 9, right? It went from 7 Plus, 7S, sorry, 8, and then remember 8 and 10 came out the same year because 7, 8, 9,
Yeah.
right? So, and after 10, it was 11, 11 Pro. So the 10 is no longer sold, right? The high end is the 11, 11 Pro, or the entry level previous to today was the 8, which was at $450. But that used the old A11 chip. So this basically is just a slot in replacement. If you want to not spend $1,000 on a new Apple phone, you can spend $400, which is still cheaper than the $450 of the iPhone 8, and you get a chip, a processor that's 2 generations newer.
And
no plus size.
Had they used SE previously? I thought they had.
They did for the 5. Remember, there was the 5 and the 5 SE, which was the 5 form factor with a speedier chip.
Got it.
And so this is the same tact. They're basically finding optimizations in their supply chain, right? So this is like, why make a new chip if they're making a lot of these A13 chips anymore? And the faster chip means that everyone can run the same OS, the same speed, can run the same apps because they're going to make all the money on the App Store stuff anyway. And it keeps people in the ecosystem without their phones feeling like they've slowed down. And at this price point, it's a way to lock people in who have now been priced out of $1,000 phones.
And that there's no number associated with this at all. It's just iPhone SE.
Just iPhone SE, single 12 megapixel camera in the back. And so you get like the smart HDR photography, you get 4K 60 FPS. The front facing camera is 7 megapixels, but it can do a portrait mode using computer vision for the front facing. So you get some of those features because of the new processor. They haven't said the battery life on this, what that is yet. So unlike the 5 SE, the previous one, where a lot of people chose that in lieu of getting the that time the iPhone 6 and 7, this is not going to be something that people are going to be like, I want this because it has the form factor I love. This is purely a pricing play. It's purely to service a part of the market that doesn't want to pay more than $400 for a phone.
That's super smart. We're entering a global recession. Like, this seems like a really, really smart play. I mean, maybe it wasn't designed to be a smart play with that prediction in mind, but I think this is actually going to do super, super well. Like a
Yeah.
good camera, not a great camera, with like the fastest chip they have available for $400 seems not like a terrible deal compared to other phone announcements we've seen.
And it starts at 64 gigs for 400. It does, if you, the smart buy here is to pay the extra $50 to get a 128. And then it's a big jump from that to 256 gigs. So $550 for 256 gigs. So it's going to be totally usable if you're worried about storage there. It also probably is an international play. This is a phone for China, for India, for other parts of the world. Again, lots of emerging markets where people don't want to pay or can't afford to pay $1,000 for a new phone. That's not to say that Apple won't have their new iPhone, flagship iPhone, at the end of this year. And one more mention before we get to the rumors on that new Magic Keyboard, the $300 iPad keyboard, you can pre-order it today. They've moved the release date up. Previously, it was going to be May. You can order it today, and it'll come out in a week. I'm like 30% interested in getting it to test it and make a video on it.
Oh, just to test it. I was like, wait,
Yeah.
don't you have a 11 Pro?
No. I have the iPad that it would work with it.
Yeah.
Not the phone, the iPad. But
Oh, the
I also
iPad. I'm sorry.
don't want to spend $300 on an iPad keyboard with a trackpad.
This is the keyboard that makes the iPad kind of levitate. It holds it up above the ground.
No, that's just the promotional picture.
No, no, I know it doesn't levitate, but it does support it. Like the iPad is like a couple inches off of the surface.
The hinge is more rigid, is what you're saying, right? It has. I'm not sure. This is one of the reasons I'm curious about this is because this is exactly the kind of product that a month and a half ago I would be really curious and go to an Apple store and try myself because I want to see how the new keyboard feels, and I want to see what the trackpad works like on an iPad. But we're not able to do that now, and I'm not going to spend $300 just to try that. But I might spend $300 to try it and then return it or make a video about it because I am morbidly curious about what a really expensive Apple iPad keyboard does for the iPad.
Yep. We will all take bets on whether or not you do return it.
Oh my God. The inconvenience of returning things now. Leaving the house. It's not just an inconvenience. It's a hazard. It's scary. But I don't know. We'll see.
See, you're already justifying keeping it.
Yeah, I'm not going to spend $300 on an iPad keyboard. New iPhones, presumably still, we haven't heard otherwise, but we also haven't heard. But the assumption is that it's going to be on track for end of this year. The latest rumor is that it will be a complete physical redesign from the curve design that we've had for a couple generations now, and it's going to take a design cue from the current iPads, which I think are some of their best designed products. This is the iPad that was released, iPad Pro that was released in late 2018 that they just refreshed last month with barely a new processor, but with the LiDAR with a depth sensor camera. But if they go that way, if they go with the hard edge and they go with that finish, I think it's going to be pretty compelling. I really like that design ID for a phone.
Me too. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if can they manufacture as many as they, what their manufacturing targets even are in this climate, and if they can hit them.
And the other big question is this going to be the first iPhone with 5G?
I don't think so.
Well, there are a couple questions about that, right?
They don't specifically call it out, right?
They haven't announced it yet.
They haven't announced it.
But don't you think we would have gotten a leak that they're going that way?
The leak is that the reports are that Apple is using, if they're going to go with 5G, they're going to have their own modems, or they're going to go with Intel's and then their own eventually. It really is it's a thing that the market isn't ready for. And we weren't even sure, coronavirus aside, if the market was going to, the infrastructure and the audience, consumers are going to welcome it because it's so confusing. And I'm not even talking about the stupid conspiracy rumors tying COVID to 5G. And I don't even want to mention that because that's imbecilic. But 5G as technology is confusing. There have been so many promises as to its benefits, but not a lot of education about how the technology is deployed in terms of what's actually needed and the differences between the different various forms of 5G. We actually just saw some of that get revealed with the new OnePlus phone. So this last week, OnePlus unveiled their 8th generation, the OnePlus 8 and the 8 Pro, and they're expensive. These are phones that previously they were the highest end Android phones that you can get at a really, really great price. The OnePlus 8 and the OnePlus 8 Pro start at, I want to say, $600, and the high end, $900, $700 for the OnePlus 8 and $900 for the OnePlus 8 Pro, up to $1,000 if you want more RAM and more storage. But both of those have 5G chips. And they have 5G chips because, I put those in air quotes, because they use the latest Qualcomm processor, which mandated that they have 5G built in. So this is all kind of business dealings. Qualcomm as a business, just like Intel as a business, wants to put out their processors, and they say, hey, phone makers, if you want to use our latest and greatest SoC, you have to also buy into our platform and our ecosystem, and these chips have 5G radios built in. And so you have to basically sell 5G as a selling point to having these phones. And they're going to be expensive for the phone makers, which means it's going to be expensive for the consumers, regardless of whether the consumers want them or need them right now or not. And here's the extra level of confusion for the 5G that's on these phones, because they use the Qualcomm 865. Yep, there goes 865, which has 8 cores. They're not the fastest version of 5G. In the 5G world, there is millimeter wave 5G, and that's the stuff that's been, you really need that direct line of sight. You need, then that's where you get the huge order of magnitude increase in bandwidth and low latency. That's the stuff that you see, being installed into, the Chase Center for like arenas, where you might get, that make sense if you're in an arena and you have line of sight from the center of the stadium to everyone in the stands. But what's on these phones is essentially 6 gigahertz 5G, which is just a little bit faster. It's like the difference between 4G and the 4G LTE when we're transitioning to that, which isn't to say that the networks and the carriers won't try to charge you more because you have 5G on your phone, and they will, but you're not going to even be upgradable to the fastest version of 5G when that gets widely spread. Very confusing is my point. So we don't know if Apple was to implement 5G in the new iPhones at the end of this year, if that's going to be which version of 5G. My guess is that they would do it half-heartedly with the incremental 5G and then have the millimeter wave 5G, which would be more expensive as a flagship feature for a future year.
My personal impression is that nobody is. As I begin to say this, I fear for the internet's correcting me, but that nobody is really dissatisfied with the speed of their cellular connection. It's spotty. Like they wish that it would continue to stay, good and on. But are people really downloading big files? They're just watching videos. Like that's the thing that they really need the bandwidth for, or FaceTiming or Zoom calling. But there's not like a need to download Steam apps, or producing videos that you need to upload and download for productivity. How is 5G even going to be pitched to us in a way that makes us feel like, oh yeah, that solves a problem I have?
It solves a problem you didn't know you had, and it allows app developers and platforms to create feature sets and experiences. And I'm sorry, this kind of goes into the marketing spiel of it all, that I think would not from a cost standpoint make sense to even develop for today. It's the same with processor speed, right? We didn't think we needed faster processors on our computers, things like ray tracing and our graphics cards. We didn't think we needed gigabit Ethernet, right? Gigabit internet. But now that we have it, I can't imagine life without it. I mean, that's how technology works.
I suppose, but I don't know if I had 5G on my phone, I bet I could go a year and not even know it.
unless
see.
until someone has a killer app for it that only works with that amount of bandwidth.
I don't know. I've read like the biggest killer app for 5G isn't for the consumers; it's for the infrastructure providers because it actually allows them to serve more users at once. And I guess that does trickle down to the consumers so that their internet or their connection isn't spotty. But that's really where like the benefits are.
If that's technology that would allow you to have wireless VR, seamless wireless VR. Now, I'm not talking about like the first gen implementation of that, but like, a couple of iterations down the line where it's just kind of built into your laptop, built into your computer, where you can just plug in a dongle or not even have to plug something in, just put on something that looks like a Quest and get desktop graphics seamlessly and not feel latency, even, the kind of latency that you get with a tethered cable, right? Or comparable to that would feel like magic.
Is that 5G?
I think 5G, the millimeter wave based 5G gives you that potential. And I think a lot of VR companies are looking at that as a way to work around, the limits of local processing on headsets. All right, moving on. An update on Quibi, 1.7 million downloads now over the past week in their free
when it's
trial
a free
period.
trial, like
It's a
what
free
does that
trial.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it means anything.
I
It
think
means there's a lot of people home trying free trials.
We're waiting for the inevitable kind of
The retention number.
Yes. It feels like when we were waiting for, what was that movie ticket service? I can't remember its name now.
Movie Pass?
Movie Pass. It feels like waiting for it to die, like waiting for Movie Pass to die. It also feels like if Apple TV Plus doesn't work out the way Apple wanted to, this is the kind of thing that if it was built in Apple phones, could have potential. This was a strategy that maybe they explicitly did not want to go that way because they wanted to go on a more, TV centric delivery method and production style. But Quibi feels like something that would work if it was something that was built in all iPhones and run and owned by Apple.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
All right. I'm going to skip ahead. Last 2 bits of story for technology. Crysis might be returning with some video game news. It's been how long since the last Crysis game?
Who knows?
Last Crysis came out 7 years ago. Crysis 3 in February 2013. And the Crysis Twitter account this week tweeted for the first time in 7 years, which I want to get this wording right because, oh, wow, they tweeted twice. Receiving data, which is a loading screen in joke for Crysis, and hey, Nomad, you still with us yesterday. So all signs are pointing to potentially either the people are speculating a whole new Crysis game or a remaster of Crysis 1 made for next-gen consoles, which I'd be very excited for.
Yeah, I guess Crysis 1 came out in 2007. It's been longer since Crysis 3 than it was between Crysis 1 and 3.
Yeah, but this is the week that Final Fantasy VII came out again. So I know it's a remake, it's totally different and new, but nostalgia is still high for classic games.
And I think there's definitely an audience out there who did not get a chance to play Crysis because of the high system requirements and because it was a PC only game. And imagine if Microsoft does a press conference with their Xbox One, whatever Series X that they're announcing, and they say, but can it run Crysis at the end? And then boom, Crysis remaster exclusive. Yes, it can run Crysis on the new next-gen console.
What about VR? They did The Climb.
I don't think Crysis would be. I mean, I would love it for it to be in VR, and that's a dream. But I think we know the reality is that to develop something for VR, porting and doing something for both platforms, for flat screens and for VR, is very difficult. And especially if you want the same type of interactions or designing a game. But the game is designed, I guess, already, right? It already has like all the maps are designed. You just have to kind of remaster it if they're doing a remaster. Yeah. Last bit. A little bit of fun news. there's a YouTube channel of a guy who works in neural networks and has been up converting archival video
Oh my
into
God.
4K 60.
This should be top story, man, of the week. I was mesmerized by this.
So people have seen the classic trip down Market Street. This was in 1906, just a few weeks before the big earthquake, and it was
4
actually
days.
on 4 days, and it was April 14th. So it was, this is kind of an anniversary of sorts for it. But that video, the highest scan of it was, I believe, in 1080, and of course, it was very low frame rate. But has since been re-uploaded to YouTube by this guy, and I'll link it in the show notes because he's done a bunch of these, to 4K 60 FPS. It's not perfect, but it's not even the increase in resolution that's great. It's the temporal resolution. It's the smoothness of it at 60 FPS that makes it look so striking.
Yeah, I mean the coloring is very sepia toned. It's not like a realism. It's not realistic, but it's a little bit of shading that you wouldn't otherwise have with black and white, and it does a really good job with facial tones, I thought. But
yeah, there's a
my God.
colorization pass, and there's an increase in resolution at 4K, but like you're not seeing more text detail than you would have seen before on like the license plates or the signs on the side of buildings.
You don't think so? I mean,
I don't think so. Not in terms of the text resolution.
I mean, it's clearly upsampled to, using algorithms. It's not like just some sort of blurry shader that makes it look, that increases the resolution. I think the algorithms that he used, he said he spent a month on this because the 3 algorithms that he used for color and temporal and spatial, they all take a long time to process the video.
Right, and there's 3 separate processes, right? There's color, there's increase in sharpness, and the sharpness, yes, the edges look sharp, but it's the same kind of like Photoshop filter, the posterization of it, that it's not like adding more facial detail. In the same way when we talked about that Voyager, neural net upresing, the HDing of Voyager, which was not HD, right? That one was not even film quality. That was tape quality, that DVD quality that got turned to 4K, and that was using full color data that was adding things like hair, fake information that would give you the illusion of real pixel data. I don't think we get as much of that here, but the frame interpolation I think is really, really nice. The smoothness of the movements.
I don't know if he did the soundtrack, but the soundtrack is excellent as well. Like there's a lot of Foley for passing automobiles and people walking by, and it's just like this video is so watchable. You just get the sense that what you're seeing is itself a spectacle for everybody there, because they don't usually see a camera, which must have been humongous, going down Market Street.
Filming for almost 15 minutes. And it was staged, to be clear. Like when they filmed this in 1906, this was a planned filmed event. It wasn't just like the equivalent of holding a GoPro walking down the street. Like it was choreographed.
Yeah.
I wonder how automated this process could be for other clips. You would think so, given the workflow, but without knowing the technical details, it's hard to say, because then it becomes this amazing tool that you could use on a whole host of archival footage.
Yeah, and he's done it for not just that kind of 100-year-old video. And he's done it for like Victorian England, walking through Amsterdam, but also some NASA footage. And there's some stabilization at 4K 60 of the lunar rover clip from Apollo 16, and that looks really, really good. It's stabilized as well.
This is a perfect example of the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. I mean, this will be an Apple, free app one day that you just can upsample any of your home movies so that it can be watched in whatever, resolution you want.
I mean, there's no reason why, looking forward to the future, and this is exactly why something like the increased bandwidth of 5G could create this magical feeling of these things just happening automatically in the background. Right? Like, I don't imagine it'll be processing your phone anytime soon, but if you had the kind of bandwidth where every video or every photo you take gets automatically sent up and computed and processed and analyzed without you having to manually click it, and you can just toggle, the auto feature, a day later, or in near real time even, that's magic.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to our next segment because we're running low on time once again, even though we said this would be a shorter episode.
Norby can't ever have a short episode.
I know.
Now it's time for a moment of science.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about this, a little bit about how the SARS-CoV-2 virus actually works, to illustrate the kinds of treatment approaches that people are taking to stop the virus from spreading. This won't be like a TikTok of where we are with the treatments, but give you just sort of a general idea of the variety of approaches underway. And the reason I'm not covering the tick out of the treatment approaches, I mentioned it last week. I think there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and it can set your expectations, off in a million directions to understand where like different trials are. And I think that a lot of the information that's probably coming out will probably be proven to be inaccurate as we go forward. But the general approaches, we have a lot of confidence in. I'm actually going to share screen, but I'll describe some of the stuff that I'm talking about just because I think the visuals are really useful here when describing the virus. So here's an image that was made by scientific illustrator Thomas Bletchstasser. He has a site, SciStyle, that's of the spike on the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So I think everyone's familiar with the image of the red end of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. This is a close-up image of that. And so that piece that's coming off, that red piece that we're all familiar with, is usually what's called a spike protein. And that protein is actually a conglomeration of 3 different proteins that are bound together. And the binding of those proteins is surrounded by what's called glycans. These are like sugar-type molecules. And these sugar-type molecules help that protein be hidden from antibodies in our human system that are looking for invaders. And the way this spike works is that there's a point in between 2 of the 3 proteins that gets cleaved by an enzyme that exists in our human body. And when they get cleaved, they're able to map onto what's called the ACE2 receptor, which is on a lot of our cells. And I'll show you a quick visualization of that. This is from Folding at Home. Some folks in our Discord shared this with us. So you can see that this video shows the 3 different proteins in that trimer colorized, so you can see the difference, and you see an end of them sort of coming apart. And when they come apart, that place where they come apart here towards the bottom is where it latches onto the ACE2 receptor on a cell. Once it latches onto that ACE2 receptor on the cell, which is on the cell membrane, it's able to essentially pull itself close to the cell and eject the RNA, like the genome of the virus material, into the cell itself. And then the viral replication starts. Once that viral replication starts, our immune response kicks into effect. And the immune response tends to be over respond to this moment for a couple of reasons. There's some signals from the virus that there's more infection there than not, and we get this huge inflammatory response, what's called a cytokine storm in some cases. And so we have this massive immune response, and that massive immune response tends to start wiping out not just cells that are infected with the virus, but any cells in the area, which leads to this cascade effect that gives you these like huge respiratory effects that we're seeing in a lot of patients. So how do you deal with this? So the virus itself is relatively simple. There's only 29 proteins on this virus in total. And so we're trying to figure out which of those proteins we can best target, both by repurposing stuff that has already been in existence and accelerating some new technology that wasn't there before. So the first is let's stop that spike from hitting that receptor first and foremost. And so that's really what the vaccine strategy is about, is essentially creating antibodies and creating a response that eventually just like hits that spike and stops it from hitting the ACE2 receptor. And then there's also additionally antibody therapies, which are, let's take the immune response from people that have already had this, replicate those antibodies and inject that into people. We're already seeing this in a form through a process called convalescent plasma sharing, where we take the blood of people that have had the virus and injecting that into frontline healthcare workers to give them a little piece of immunity from the virus itself. Those two processes are like probably where we see the most attention right now, is how do we stop that spike 2 receptor from hitting the ACE2, either with a vaccine or through this antibody therapy. There's lots of different approaches there, but by and large, it's really like stop the spike. We stop it from being able to enter the cell in the first place. Then you essentially don't get infected at all. Two is, I mentioned there's an enzyme that cleaves that spike to essentially open it up so it can bind to the receptor. So can we actually stop that enzyme from being a piece? And the enzyme is like, there's a couple, it's either called furin or TMPRSS2. So if we can block that enzyme production, can we actually block the spike from cleaving so we can actually do work on this? That's probably harder to do, but there's still being work done on that. The third is, once the virus is in the cell, can we actually use antivirals that are drugs that will go and stop the genome of the virus from replicating inside of cells? So there's a lot of testing of antivirals that have already been developed to like treat HIV and other viruses that essentially just stop the virus from replicating at all. There's a lot of different mechanisms they approach, but that's our next strategy. And then our last strategy is, I mentioned the immune response sort of kicks into high gear. Can we slow down that immune response so our immune response isn't actually damaging the cells? So while you're still infected, we can actually control the severity of the disease for people that have that huge response. And so what a lot of scientists are doing is looking at drugs that have been used to treat other autoimmune disorders where our immune system goes haywire, and trying to tamp it down. Like there's particular cytokines, like these like base level receptors that they're looking at. I've seen a lot of people looking at interleukin-1 and interleukin-6, but that information is sort of changing as we get a better shape of this disease. But can we just tamp down that effect overall? So that's like, there's a bunch of different approaches to developing the treatment that we're going through right now. We got an update from the person in charge of the at the NIH about the vaccine trial, about how they've been able to shave time off. But the most important thing that she mentioned is like the reason we're able to accelerate so quickly is the spike on SARS-CoV-2 shares a lot of commonality to the spike that was on SARS and on the MERS virus as well. So we had already been doing some work previously on understanding that spike. And by the way, the shape of that spike, which looks like a crown, is where the word corona comes for coronavirus. So we've already been doing some analysis of the proteins on that spike for a long time. And so they basically took some work that was already on the shelf from that previous work and applied it forward to SARS-CoV-2. So I think what you're seeing is kind of a combination of, let's take work that's already been done, try to accelerate that forward, targeting different things. But what you're going to be hearing is a whole bunch of approaches in the news that relate to these basic strategies. Stop the immune response, stop the viral replication, create a larger antibody response to stop the spike from creating entry into the cell in the first place, or stop the enzyme from creating the mechanism for the virus to enter the cell. Those are the basic things right now. There's probably some other approaches that are going to attack other proteins on the virus itself, but those four main approaches are what's going on right now.
Did those same approaches have an effect on SARS and previous epidemics?
We never progressed to the point where we actually did human trials in any way to test the efficacy. So
Because we didn't need to,
w-
right?
yeah, we controlled it in some other way, and then funding was cut, and so we never really progressed. We've tried there's essentially like 4 coronaviruses that are infecting humans. Most of them are related to the common cold, and so we have tried some things against that use this kind of technique, but not in a vaccination strategy that you're seeing now. There were a couple questions on Discord and from some tested listeners I'll quickly address. So one was about the idea of reinfection. There's some stories coming out of South Korea and Germany of people that have been quote unquote reinfected. And these are, I would sort of caution you around all of those stories, because there's a difference between something called reactivation, where let's say, Jeremy, you get the virus, you actually develop COVID-19, the disease from the virus, and then recover from it. We expect when you recover of it, like one of the things we look for is like how much of the virus is left in your system after you recovered. Well, sometimes the virus is latent in your system and can essentially go from dormant to being back on. That's called reactivation. And so we can actually see viral load back in your system, but you never develop, because of antibodies in your system or some other reason we don't understand yet, we never see you develop the disease again. Now, if you develop the disease again, the COVID-19 disease, that's reinfection. And so right now it's not clear that anyone's been reinfected. We have some really, 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 really early evidence that people have had some reactivation of virus in their system. But again, super, super early. There's also a report out on a partnership between a Stanford lab that's been developing an antibody test, and with Major League Baseball, where they've actually shipped antibody tests to 10,000 employees of MLB, of 27 MLB teams, like concession workers, front, staff, players, to take this antibody test. And the idea there is we can test people in multiple cities of multiple demographics really, really quickly, because MLB teams like employ a bunch of people. I wonder how representative the demographics are, but it's a quicker way to sort of do a study in a lot of different places at once, leveraging the sort of network of teams that are in a bunch of different cities. I think that's it. I think, let me see. I think there was one other question really quickly. The other question that I got was about strains of the virus, quote unquote. Strain is like a scientific term that is often misunderstood. So we've seen, I think the latest report I've seen is that there's more than 1,000 mutations in the viral genome that we've seen, but that's only translated into 11 different mutations on the spike protein, meaningful mutations in that spike, 11 different mutations in the proteins of the virus that are actually doing something, and 1 mutation in the spike protein that we see. So essentially, there's only one real virus that's out there that's causing different immune responses in us. So this idea of like, are there multiple strains of this right now? The answer is pretty much no. As far as we know right now, there's really just one version of this virus in terms of how it interacts with our body, even if like there's some mutations and like A's and T's are in slightly different shapes between the one that's in Europe versus the one that's in the US. Do you guys have any questions? Are you hanging in there?
Well, I'm curious about what your current position is on masks. Are you wearing one when you go outside? I know that Gavin Newsom, our governor, recently recommended, why not? If you're going to go outside, wear a mask.
So I've been wearing a mask for a couple weeks when I go to grocery stores or places where there's people. I'm doing it. I think I mentioned this on a podcast a couple weeks ago. The scientific evidence around this is mixed in terms of like the pure hard evidence. Like, does wearing a mask like actually prevent me from getting it? There's some evidence that it does. I think the stronger evidence is around the social impact of this. I think giving people a tool, as long as they don't have overconfidence that it is protective, is important right now when people feel so powerless. They need something. And so putting on a mask, even if it offers 5-10% more impact, we don't really know what the number is. I think it's important because it gives people a sense, and it represents a social cue that you're thinking about this, that you're trying to protect yourself, that you're going to be cautious. I think that's actually a really vitally important component of this. So I wear a mask because of what it represents to all the people around me, more so than what the hard scientific evidence says. If we're looking at the pure scientific evidence, like wash your hands is number one by like 10,000 miles. By so far, it's hard to even fathom. But at the same time, I'm doing it because I think it makes sense.
Yeah, and that's something that hopefully infrastructurally we'll see more, like wash stations, and just encourage, like that's hard to signal, right? Like washing hands, something we tell each other to do, but like things in place, and maybe technology can help. Playing 20 seconds of something, something built into a watch, to remind people, because that will be more of a new normal than I think the mask wearing for the near future.
Yeah,
all right.
Sorry, it reminds me of like you go into the kid areas and on the Disney cruises, and you have to put your hands. You're not allowed in unless you put your hands into these basically like hand car washes. You don't touch a thing. Like you put your hands in, motion sensors detect they're in there, and then you take them out, you dry them off. I can see that being a new normal.
I think the new normal, and Ed Young wrote a great piece about this in the Atlantic, that we're going to have to start thinking about is what does periods of social distancing in certain locations at certain times look like and feel like. It's not going to be like where we are now, where it's total shelter in place, but we're probably going to try to limit mass gatherings until we have a treatment available. And so what does it look like to go to the grocery store? What does it look like to go to the park? What does it look like to go to a sporting event, to the theater? Like, we're going to have to think through a lot of that coming up, and come up with something that's acceptable to a lot of people. That's where we're going to have the biggest impact on controlling flare-ups, is stuff like social distancing, washing hands, just better hygiene overall. We've seen like a massive drop in other hygiene impacted diseases during this time, including the flu. And it's not due in small part to everything we're seeing here.
Yeah. Temperature taking, also some other countries are doing.
Yeah, I will say keep an eye out for emerging information on racial and economic variance and outcomes related to this. I think you're going to start to see a lot more reporting on that in the next couple weeks, because we are out of New York and some other areas. We're seeing some early evidence that we're seeing quite a few disparities in that way, and we don't know why. And so we need to unpack that in a real way, because it might give us a hint of like who the vulnerable populations really are beyond older people. That allow us to really focus social distancing in really specific places than just on everyone.
All right. Thank you, Kishore, once again. And for people who have questions, you're taking some questions from our Discord. So you can always go to discord.gg/tested, and there is a channel for people to throw questions up about this, or also about technology, and we'll be taking those in the future.
My new normal is insomnia, so I'm like happily in there late at night.
I'm shocked by the number of Diet Coke cans we don't see on the camera right now. Oh, that's the wrong cue. Give me 1 second. Here we go.
The VR Minute. Virtual reality this week.
Jeremy. I hear you beat Half-Life Alyx.
Have you played it yet, Kishore?
No, because I only have my Rift. I don't even have a Rift S, so I've been hesitant to play it because I want to see it in I want to experience it in higher resolution.
Yeah. Look, I feel bad for ever saying anything negative about this game because it really is.
Are you apologizing? Is that what you're doing? Is this a mea culpa?
I can defend my position. I think that I come from a place of truth, and I don't think a lot of reviewers took into account how different the last 90 minutes is compared to the rest of the game. I mean, and also from a personal standpoint, like I don't think my ideal virtual reality game, unlike flat screen maybe, is a first person shooter. Okay. I'm a Quake player, like at my heart. I love first person shooters with a mouse and keyboard, but I don't know if that's the experience I'm looking for from VR personally. I know
I think to push the medium forward.
Yes, in order to get the most out of that medium, to get what that medium is designed to, the sensations that it's designed to give you. I think you can get more out of, I don't know, maybe 0G, maybe, force powers, this kind of thing. But that, and it's hard not to talk about this game in terms of spoilers, but I finally finished the game, and I realized that it is like a masterpiece. It is absolutely, that last 90 minutes is far and away the best experience that I've had in virtual reality.
Is this the last 90 minutes? Is this after the zoo? Everything after the zoo? Is there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. I would say after the point. What can I say? I mean, without spoiling it. But you mentioned that there's a point in the game where you are given one last opportunity to upgrade your weapon.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I thought that when you explained that, I thought it was going to be okay. Behind the next door is the final boss, and that's the end of the game. But it's not. Like, there's a considerable amount of the game after that point, and I would say, like, from that point on, the game it blew me away. It absolutely becomes something else. And
what about, without going to specifics, was it the sound design, enemy design, combat encounters? Because there aren't puzzles really after that point. It's really storytelling and kind of this barreling you toward a finale.
Well, the storytelling was great, but that's not what blew me away. The stuff that blew me away was the level design. They do some very Escher-like things with the level design that I think was inventive, but also they start to employ the Source 2 engine in ways that they didn't yet, like in any way. You start to experience things with gravity that you hadn't yet until that point in the game, and that kind of thing was the perfect execution of virtual reality because it allows you to experience depth and, just the volumetric physics system that they have, where objects have, like weight and like mass, and they make different sounds when they hit things, and you can interact with these things that are now floating in a way that when they're just sitting around and you can grab them, doesn't have the same impact. And so I spent a long time just experimenting with the physics. Now that
that's really interesting.
0G, and I wasn't forced to, like, the combat was still there if you chose to walk forward, but if you didn't, it was a playground, and it's just absolutely magical, the things that you could experience there.
And it's so funny because you described that as the last 90 minutes of the game. I think that part that I played through was under an hour, well under an hour, especially that 0G part. That was maybe 10 minutes at most, because it's from a actual level design and combat point, it's very, very brief, and they also do things with scale in that last part of the level that I think they don't do earlier in the game, that really takes advantage of VR. And then I don't know if it's like they were trying to get you to a point where there's this amazing spectacle and they want to let you savor it and not have that kind of experience spoiled earlier in the game that made it impactful, or if that's the kind of stuff that's the most maybe discomforting for new VR users. So they wanted to minimize that and really save that toward the end and have most of the bulk of the first part of the game be more traditional FPS.
Probably. My impression honestly, like, and who knows, but obviously a lot of people at Valve know, and I'm sure some other people know, but I don't. My impression was that this last portion of the game was so much more finished and well fleshed out that they had this, and they created like a lot of the game. You know, filler's not the right word because it's a fantastic $60 purchase, but there's a lot of the game that is very just repetitive. And the combat, I didn't feel like offered as much challenge as it did towards the end of the game, and I wanted more from the first parts of the game. I think that they, throughout the rest of the early parts of the game, they play it way too safe with locomotion, and whereas the environments are beautiful and stunning, and the story is there, and the sounds are phenomenal, the gameplay itself just didn't deliver for me until it ramped up towards the end. And it wasn't just that 0G part. Like there is an enemy at one point that is the most heavy metal thing I've ever seen in a video game. Like it is just you're it's not an enemy you can defeat. You have to avoid it. And as you're trying to traverse the environment without getting killed by it, the effects are just off the chart. Like I've never seen stuff like this. It's absolutely super cool.
Yeah, I think something I would completely agree with is that earlier on in the game, and I know that for a fact that the way they designed a lot of the game is these little rooms and arenas were polished and polished and polished, and the way they think about them is like, this is an environment that's a combat arena. Let's figure out how to make this really fun, something different, and then here's a corridor or an alleyway that gets you to a building that's the next arena or the next stage. And some of those work better than others, and for the most part, the combat stuff was not as groundbreaking as some of the trailers had me hope they were. You know, the interaction with the cars and dodging, and a lot of that I think due to the enemy AI still being more of a traditional flat screen style enemy AI, and not really feeling as alive as what VR, the environment, felt like when you were there.
Yeah.
In the Combine specifically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad you finished it. I'm glad you enjoyed that last part. Are you going to replay it? Are you going to revisit it?
I'm tempted to replay it on a harder mode, but yeah, I don't know. I don't want to play through those first several segments. Like I feel like the game leans a little too heavily on horror, as something that VR does extraordinarily well. You know, they're right. Like it's really good at that. But that's not what I'm looking for in a gameplay experience. I like mechanics, and I felt like they amped up. Like they, plus not to mention that towards the end of the game, like you get a whole new ability. Like that is like a whole new offensive ability, which is just like, that's what I want, like for the rest of the game. Like I want that. That was the way that felt, the way that you're.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
It was.
I
awesome.
appreciate that you're both protecting me from spoilers right now.
And the greater audience who haven't played it or watched the videos.
I mean, this is a Half-Life game, so I'm sure it had a cliffhanger at the end in the storyline. Was that satisfying? Did you find the way it integrated the story and set up the future interesting, given where we were with a prequel type story?
I was not satisfied with the ending of my character, but there's more to the ending of the game that I felt was that they did stick the landing. What about you, Norm?
I really love what they did with the character, and I think it added. I think the writers wrote their way around it being a prequel into actually feeling like a continuation of the series in a way that completely surprised me. There is a point. Twist. There's some great twists in there.
There's a point at which it's implied that the player, you have a choice. Do you have a choice?
No.
Okay.
No. There's no choice. It's purely scripted. It is just this is what's happening. What has happened to the player. Yeah, to Alex. Something I want to give a shout out to. People are starting to create mods, and you can download right now in Steam. There is a early version of a Horde mode mod, Horde Defense game mode. It's created by the guy I mentioned last week, Manello, and you can easily download this. It's a map essentially, and you just got to load the map up using a launch parameter in Steam. But it's a warehouse level, head crabs, an increasing level of difficulties, and waves of enemies come at you. It's very, very difficult, and I find it very satisfying and just wanting to have more gunplay and gameplay in that universe. And it also makes me really want some type of co-op, because I think a co-op horde mode would be really, really fun with the assets they've created for the game. On the quest side, I want to give a shout out to something that's on SideQuest, a new version of the very popular VR Physics Playground. This is kind of a Boneworks style sandbox where you can you have an array of weapons and you can spawn enemies, and it's completely free, and it's not like a full game. It's a tech demo, but it has the kind of physics objects and hand interactions of grabbing things and throwing things, slowing time down. And the newest version was launched over the weekend. Again, Physics Playground, and it's on SideQuest, free to download. If you want to play a Boneworks style game on the Quest or don't want to pay for Boneworks, recommended there. On the Steam VR Vive side, there's a third-party app that's been very popular called Advanced Settings. It allows you to do things in headset, like change your guardian boundary, your floor orientation, all these kind of things. Very useful if you're using something like Live and need to do some type of compositing. But the new version of 5.0 is out, and it's in Steam, so you can easily download OVR Advanced Settings, and it becomes a little icon in your Steam menu. Click that, and you have a whole sub-menu of advanced options. Kind of an essential thing. And then also, Pixel Rip 1995 has a release date, April 23rd, so it's just about a week from now, and we've been very excited about this. I'm curious whether 95 will have the same impact as the last one, given that a lot of the novelty of the last one is in how inventive it was. And it seems like they're going down that same path of, obviously a different era of classic games and putting that in VR, but it will have maybe a little less of that wow factor because we've seen that there's the game design from the first game, and it's kind of redoing that with a new story and new games that they're emulating.
I don't know. I mean, I loved that first game for the reasons that you're talking about, and I would be happy to play more. I'm happy to play more for sure, but it won't be as surprising, right? There was a delight when we reviewed 1989 of being like, right, "Whoa, they're doing something really cool in VR." That's melding true. Flat screen nostalgia with VR, and I'm hoping to be surprised as well. Well, it's possible that they will incorporate hand presence more than the first game, because the first one, it really was just moving the controller around, the Game Boy that you were holding. And so I'm hoping, especially given that Oculus approved this one and not the first one, that maybe that was part of their thinking, is they wanted more out of the touch controllers. I have no idea. I don't remember from the demo that we played if that was more than like just a little bit of mechanics in parts of the game, but I can't wait to play it. Yeah, 6 levels. It's gonna be in the Steam store, the Oculus store, and then it will be out on the PSVR store in May. And that does it for this week's episode. Once again, we have no outro, so requests for listeners out there where you are looking for new outro pieces, which you can download the SoundCloud raw outro sound file and create one. We'll play in the future, as well as any questions you might have for Kishore or us. You can always jump into our Discord. That's just discord.gg/tested. We have a really wonderful community there. And for those of us night owls, up late at night is kind of the best time to hang out, at least on the West Coast, because for people in the UK or New Zealand, it's middle of the day for them. Anything else you guys want to plug or shout out? Hand sanitizer.
Its existence is awesome. I think next week we'll talk about some of the best tech that's helping us during this time, which is a suggestion in the Discord. Love that idea.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I was thinking also maybe a segment on silver linings as well. Like if we had anything what came about because of this situation that we were really kind of enjoying. Like I have a small list of that I'm compiling too.
Ooh, things that delight you.
Yeah.
What a 180 turnaround. A new man. All right. Well, good to see you guys as always. And thank you all out there for listening and supporting us. And we'll be back next week. See ya.